Hello my fellow researchers, my name is Jason, and in this video we're going to be going over the multiple regression method. And in this example I'm going to be going through this process using two predictor variables, them being x1 and x2, and we're going to have one dependent variable, that's variable y. Okay, so x1 and x2 are our independent variables, or our predictor variables, and we have one dependent variable, variable y, and that's the variable that we are trying to predict based on x1 and x2. And this is part one of our multiple regression video series, and in this part we are focusing on descriptive. Whoops, let me just go back there. We're focusing on descriptive, there we go, statistics. Okay, so basically by the end of this video, all we're trying to do is solve for the sum of products between each of the combinations that we can make using these three variables. Now, if you're doing multiple regression with more than two predictor variables, this is going to get very tricky and long and tedious, and so people generally don't do multiple regression with more than two variables using the pen and paper method. We use SPSS, and that's what I'm going to be doing near the end of this video series for you. But let's get started. You will have to do pen and paper multiple regression in your statistics class in university, so this is how I suggest you do it. I suggest you first organize your page like this, so you know exactly what you're trying to solve for ahead of time, and everything is in the correct order, or the correct sequential order, so that we never have to really be, looking around for values that we haven't solved for yet. Everything is going to be sort of smooth if we keep it in this order. And I have my two formulas here. Sum of squares for variable x, and that's just the generic formula, and sum of products between variables a and b, and again that's the generic formula. So for example here it says sum of products between x1 and y. Well, you're just gonna replace a with x1 and replace b with y in this formula here to solve for this value. And that's what you'll do for each of these over here. Now, I've already solved each of these values, for each of these values, so I'm just going to explain how I calculated them, and then I'm going to put the answer in. So I suggest you go through this on your own and make sure you get the same answers. Now, I always start with n. N is the number of cases, and we know that each of these values belongs to one point, one data point, you could say. So a person, one individual person, perhaps was measured on variable x1 and they got a value of 2, and then they were also measured on variable x2 and they got a value of 1, and we're trying to predict what would their value be for variable y, and here you can see they obtained a value of 1. And so we're going to use that information to create our regression equation, and we're going to determine the significance of that regression equation. So for n, if we count these up, we're going to get a total of 15. Now for sum of x1, here we're just going to add up each of these values. Okay, so 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 and so on all the way down to the bottom for x1, and we're going to get 135. Now I want you to go across the rows here when you're doing your calculations, so you can kind of keep the same order of operations in your mind. Sum of x2, okay, again just adding up all these values here for x2, and we're going to get 30. Sum of y, same thing, add up all your y values, and we're going to get 135. Now you want to find the mean. M stands for the mean of x1. So you add up all these values, which you've already done, and then you divide by the total number of values, which is 15 for n. So 135 divided by 15 is going to give us 9. Same thing for the mean of x2. For the mean of x2, it's going to be 30 divided by 15 is going to be 2. And then the mean of y is 135 divided by 15, which is also going to be 9. Now we have the sum of x1 squared. And in this case, we're going to be squaring each of these values and adding them up. So, for example, this would be 4 plus 9 plus 16 plus 1 plus 25 plus 100 plus 49 plus 81, etc. And you're going to get a value of 1605. Same thing for the sum of x2 squared. Again, square each of these values and add them all up. And we're going to get 70. And for the sum of y squared, again, same thing for all these values. We're going to get 1605. Now, the sum of squares for x1, here's my formula, my generic formula, and here we have x already in this position. So we're just going to basically, put in the values in the formula that we already know and see what we get for sum of squares for x. Sum of x squared, okay, is 1605. Sum of x is 135. N is 15. So when you plot that in your calculator, okay, we're going to be getting a value of 390. Now do the same for the sum of squares for variable x2. Okay, just use these values instead. Use 70 for the sum of x2 squared, and then use 30 for the sum of x2. Again, putting them in this formula here, and we're going to get 10. And again, do the same for y using the appropriate y variable values, and we're going to get 390. Now here we're going to be starting to multiply these variable values between each other. Here we have sum of x1 y. Okay, so basically what you're going to do is you're going to multiply the x1 value by its corresponding y value, and then you're going to do that for each of these rows, and you're going to add them up in the end. So it's 2 times 1 plus 3 times 2 plus 4 times 3 plus 1 times 4 plus, and you go all the way down to the end. And when you do that, you should get 1578. And you're going to do the same thing for the sum of x2y. So now here, 1 times 1 plus, 1 times 2 plus, 1 times 3 plus, all the way down to the end, and you should get 330. Finally, sum of x1, x2. So now you're just going to do the same thing, but between these two variables. All the way down to the end, you should get 330. Now the final value we want to solve for is the sum of products, again, between each of these combinations that we've kind of been going through. And here's our formula. It's our generic formula. And so, for example, here we have x1. Replace a with x1, and then replace y with b to see where the values will fit in this formula. And we've already calculated, for example, this value here is actually going to be, this value. This value here is going to be the multiplied values of sum of x1 times, in this case, sum of y. So 135 times 135, that's what you'll put in the numerator right here, and then n is 15. And so when you solve for those values, you're going to get 363. And then do the same for sum of products x2y, and you're going to get 60. And then do the same for sum of products x1, x2, and you should get 60. So we've covered all of our descriptive statistics. We have our sum of squares, we have our sum of products. Now we're ready to go on to calculate our regression equation in the next section of this video series. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Cheers.